Well, hi everyone. My name is Katie. I'm part of SimCore in the DRC for Spark. Welcome to our SimCore webinar today, where I will be introducing you to two JupyterLab services on our o²S²PARC platform, one which is new and one which has been recently updated. Great. In case you're new to Spark or to o²S²PARC, o²S²PARC is our open online platform created for the Spark program where investigators can create, share, and execute their computational models or data analysis pipelines for analysis of nerve organ interactions. As part of o²S²PARC, we're always creating new and improving existing applications for you, which is what brings us to this webinar today. Just to go over the agenda for this webinar, I'll start off with why we like JupyterLabs so much, why we have several different what we call flavors of JupyterLabs. If you've seen our previous webinars, this is not the first time that we have updates about JupyterLab services. So why is it that we're using so many of them? Then I'll introduce you to an updated version of our JupyterPhoenix service, which has new functionality like meshing capabilities through Gmesh and interactive 3D plotting through PowerView. Next, I'll introduce our brand new service, the JupyterLab Chaste, which also has support for scripting in C++ through the Zeus Cling kernel. Finally, I'll conclude with some questions from the audience or whatever concerns you might have. So we can get started. First off, why do we like JupyterLabs so much? And to kind of answer that question, we would like to understand why what are some of the driving forces for usage of not only JupyterLab, but the o²S²PARC platform as a whole. You've probably heard over and over again how Spark wants to implement fair research, and that goes not only for data, but for code as well. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we make this happen in o²S²PARC by allowing researchers to first find published models or data analysis pipelines on o²S²PARC from other Spark researchers. You may also want to publish your own models so that others may be able to find them as well. o²S²PARC is meant to be a central location for computational models or data analysis pipelines developed by the Spark program. But just being able to find these models and data analysis pipelines is not really enough if you're unable to access them. JupyterLabs is one way that we allow you to not only access other people's code, but also to edit them and run it as well. Along with providing accessibility, we have the modified JupyterLab services on o²S²PARC such that they're interoperable with all other services available on o²S²PARC. And finally, all of our flavors of JupyterLabs have everything pre-installed such that once you have code running in one of them, the code, whether it's a computational model or a data analysis pipeline, can be shared with others who can easily run them just through the web browser on o²S²PARC. So there are no compatibility issues with software dependencies or from different operating systems, which could be a barrier for sharing code. As for the JupyterLab services themselves, here's just basically what the service interface looks like, in case you're unfamiliar with the JupyterLab interface. As I mentioned, they encapsulate an environment, a kind of development environment, along with the files that you create inside, which include a file system and pre-installed packages depending on which flavor of JupyterLab that you're using. The reason why we have multiple flavors of JupyterLabs is because the functionalities required by different groups at Spark could be different. This one that I'm showing you right now is the FEniCS flavored JupyterLab. We also have JupyterLab add-ons such as Git integration and access to the terminal for easier file browsing or for executing commands directly through the terminal interface. Now, this might be useful for some, and it's actually really essential for some applications such as Chaste. Another huge benefit of Jupyter Notebooks is that they can contain formatted documentation of your code in Markdown language in addition to the code itself. And the code itself can actually be run right in line. Here you see that cells can be chosen to contain code or Markdown or just the raw text. Other extensions that we have pre-installed in the JupyterLabs are interactive plotting inline, where you can create using, for example, matplotlib widgets for Python users. We also support LaTeX in notebooks for well-formatted documentation and equations. As I mentioned, services on o²S²PARC were never meant to be standalone, because what we'd like to happen is that different researchers combine their analyses together and create something new and maybe discover something new by this modularized linking between them. So JupyterLabs are no different in this case, and we provide you a way to retrieve inputs from or send outputs to a different service. To get the outputs of another service into the input of your JupyterLab, you can first link the two by dragging and dropping them from the output port of the upstream service to the input port of your JupyterLab. The JupyterLab has 4 possible input ports. You can see these on the left here in the settings, and the file number will correspond to the folder that you have in your workspace of the JupyterLab. Once that file is connected, you can look in the file browser of the JupyterLab here, go into the input folder, and you will see a number of input folders that are labeled with the same numbers as the connected files. So here what we have is one single file that's connected in between these two services. Therefore, there is only one input number 1, and under the inputs folder, you will only have one single subfolder, the input_1 folder. And anything that you find in this folder is the output of this sleeper service upstream. So in this case, it's just one single file, but you can also pass a zipped folder with multiple files, and those files will be automatically unzipped by the JupyterLab. Output linking operates pretty much exactly the same way. JupyterLabs have 4 possible output ports. To send an output to a downstream service, just add the file or the files that you want to transfer to the appropriate folder in the outputs directory, and then under the labeled output folder. So as I said, there are 4 possible outputs. So if you want a certain output to go to the output number 1 port, which will then be connected to your downstream service, then you would put it into that subfolder. In this case, I'm using a 2D plot service downstream of the Jupyter one, and the 2D downstream service has a possible 5 inputs. So all 4 of the outputs can be mapped directly into this 2D service. Now that we've summarized the basic features of all of the JupyterLab services, we can now start exploring the newest ones on o²S²PARC, starting with the JupyterPhoenix. Just in case you are unfamiliar with FEniCS, it's an open source popular computing platform for solving partial differential equations using the finite element method. And if you're interested in this project and haven't used it before, I'd highly encourage you to take a look at their main website, which contains lots of documentation, very in-depth documentation about usage, as well as really in-depth tutorials. In this webinar, we're just going to focus on the features of o²S²PARC that enable its usage through the JupyterLab service. On o²S²PARC, what you do once you've created this FEniCS JupyterLab is that you go into the interface, and we've had this service for a while, but we've installed several new additions that really allow you to take advantage of the full functionality. We've added, for example, Gmesh, which is an open source 3-dimensional finite element mesh generator. I'll also highly encourage you to take a look at their documentation for full Gmesh functionality and the syntax that's used in order to use it properly. We also provide a converter that was developed in-house for translating meshes produced by Gmesh into a format that's understood by FEniCS. This is already packaged to the FEniCS Jupyter, so you don't have to install anything new in order to use it. And finally, we have 2 ways of viewing FEniCS solver solutions inside the Jupyter notebooks interactively. We have a matplotlib widget for 2D plots, and we also have ParaView for 3D results. To demonstrate these features, we created a template project on o²S²PARC that you can access, and I'll show you how that works right now. This new video. What happens is once you've logged into o²S²PARC, you can go into the Discover tab where you find all of the published templates. Clicking on that template will allow you to create a copy of our JupyterPhoenix demo study, and that'll create a copy for you that you can access later on inside your Studies tab. This contains one single service, which is why all you see is the JupyterLab interface, and this looks very much like what I had shown you earlier. You have your file browser on the left-hand side, and then you can create new notebooks. You can open a new terminal if you would like. And in this template study, we have a demo notebook already inside of the JupyterLab service. So we're going to open that up right now and see what's inside. So here is a pretty brief introduction of what we have going on. We import some of the FEniCS utilities and some of the plotting. The matplotlib widget is going to be used later on to look at results. And we can just run through all of these cells. So the very first part is going to be GMesh, how we're going to define kind of the boundaries of what we're going to solve. This is all in GMesh syntax. So if you're unfamiliar with it, again, we encourage you to look through the GMesh documentation. Once you've defined something like this, where we have a main domain, and then we have a small rectangle inside of that main domain, then we basically create two rectangles and then mesh them. Boundaries are also defined in this GMesh syntax, and we provide a script for defining this geometry as well as the mesh. Then what we do is we give you a way to translate that mesh into something that FEniCS then understands, and then visualize this mesh with matplotlib. Since the mesh parameters are changeable, what you can do is also make the mesh more fine-grained. So here's an example of doing that. Now you have a much finer mesh in the domain, in the subdomain where there's the smaller rectangle. Next, what we'll do is just solve a very simple set of equations. What we have here is basically the Helmholtz equation. And what we do is we also have a forcing function, and that's going to be defined along the smaller rectangle, the yellow one that you had seen earlier. Now going through using the FEniCS solver, what we can do is solve this equation with the forcing function and the boundary conditions that we have set. And once it solves all of this, we can view the results in line in this Jupyter notebook. And here what we do is just plot the solution through the matplotlib widget. And just to note, this is an interactive plot. So what you can do is zoom, or you can also pan the view around. And it's just another benefit of using Jupyter notebooks for your analyses. Next, what we'll do is pretty much solve the same system of equations, but in 3D as opposed to 2D. It'll take not much longer time. And once we're done with that, we can also plot the results in 3 dimensions using the embedded PowerView viewer. This takes a few seconds to go, but once it's plotted here, we also have this PowerView inline as an interactive plot. So you can zoom, you can pan, and then you can shift this slice viewer around. And this can all be done just inside the same Jupyter notebook. And this can be really helpful for not only saving your own analyses, but maybe also sharing this with other people. We had the slice viewer, and then we can also show more of a volumetric plot. Again, this is all interactive. You can zoom in and out and shift it around. All right. So next, what we'll do is explore the JupyterLab Chaste, which is a brand new service on o²S²PARC. And Chaste is a general purpose simulation package for multi-scale modeling of biology and physiology, originally developed at the University of Oxford. It's really widely used for tissue and cell level electrophysiology, discrete tissue modeling, and soft tissue modeling. And it's heavily used by the virtual stomach group, actually, from Spark. As with FEniCS, Chaste has very extensive documentation and tutorials. And if it's something that you might be interested in using for your own research, I'd again highly encourage that you explore their website for more information. Just as FEniCS, we will go over in this webinar just the basics of how to use Chaste inside of our new JupyterLab Chaste service. On o²S²PARC, the JupyterLab Chaste service has, of course, Chaste pre-installed. Its source code is in the home Jovian Chaste directory, which, just to note, is not actually your default working directory. The working directory of all JupyterLabs is home Jovian work. And the reason we do this is to keep the Chaste source code separate from your own projects and your own code. If you're an experienced Chaste user, you can take advantage of two symbolic links that we've created between the default Chaste projects directory and the home Jovian work directory. So here you have your working directory and you have one project symbolic link and another one between the Chaste default test output folder and the work directory. The Chaste tutorial projects are also accessible in the Chaste source folder, and we can just go and into a demonstration of how you might interact with Chaste through our o²S²PARC JupyterLab Chaste service. So here we are in the JupyterLab Chaste interface. What we have is, again, we have the file browser on the left. What I've just done is created a new terminal. So for Chaste, most of the operations that you're going to be doing will be through the terminal. So it's very helpful that the JupyterLab has this terminal option. What we see is our base folder is the working directory. And what we can do is go into the projects directory. And Chaste actually gives you a way to simply make new projects through several bash scripts. Again, this is all documented on their repositories and in their documentation, so you can look into that to see what you have available to you. Here, I'm just creating a very basic project called default name template project. And since Chaste is all C++ based, you have to build the project before you can run all of your simulations. So here we can build it using the Chaste default bash script. And then once we have everything built, then we can run that. Or also what we can do is go into the source directory and look at their tutorials. They have several different tutorials here. You have heart, you have lung, and what you can do is build the lung project here, and that basically will compile their tutorial for you. There are a host of other tutorials on their website, so have a look if you're interested in that. And besides the Chaste installation, we also have another useful feature that could be interesting for those of you who are not necessarily Chaste users, but who are still C++ users. We've installed inside of this JupyterLab the Zeus-Kling kernel into the JupyterLab, which is a C++ interpreter that was originally developed at CERN. Normally for C++ code, you have to compile it before it can be run, which is what you saw us do for the tutorials and for the projects using Chaste. And this makes C++ fairly slow for prototyping. Zeus-Kling implements something that's a just-in-time compiler, which allows you to essentially script in C++ through these Jupyter notebooks, much like you would do for other scripting languages, such as Python and R. Zeus-Kling and JupyterLab also provide some really nice features, such as support for multiple C++ standards, output rendering, and inline help. So if you're interested in these features and more, I'd encourage you to look through the Zeus Klings documentation to see all of the features, and also look in its GitHub repository, where I got a demonstration notebook that really highlights all of its features. Just quickly show the demonstration notebook from the Zeus Kling GitHub repository. So you can also download this as well. You can show that it works in a JupyterLab Chaste service. And you can either clone the repository into your JupyterLab service by using the Git integration, or you can download the notebook itself. Here, what I did was I went to their repository on GitHub, open source, into their notebooks, and then we have this demonstration notebook as well as some data that is going to be plotted within the notebook itself. I downloaded this and then I put it into my JupyterChase. And here, what I can do is just start going through some of the demonstrations that they have. What they have are very common C++ commands. So for example, cout and cin, these are going to be shown directly into the command line. So you can see this inside the Jupyter notebook cells themselves. And this is something that is, if you're not a C++ user, it's actually very cool to see that you are essentially scripting in C++, because usually what you would have to do is write this. You might have to create a header file and then compile everything and then run it, and then you would get your outputs. So here you kind of get that instantly. Now it supports a host of different C++ functionality, like different versions of C++. Another helpful feature is that you have this this inline documentation. You can actually explore that right in the JupyterLab itself. So if you use this magic to get help for example, the standard vector, you can see this documentation in the output cell of your JupyterLab service. Moving on, we also see different display mechanisms. And here we can show rich formats such as this JPEG image, also inline. We have this, this audio file, which was also downloaded from their own repository. So you can see that as well. You can also even develop some GUI components directly inline. Here we just have a very simple rectangle, and then we can also update the color, the text that's shown. Here we also have some magics. And finally, if you would like to use C++ for example, data science or machine learning applications, there is xtensor also pre-installed, and you can use this to create arrays. And then it really has a very similar experience as NumPy. So that kind of concludes our summary of our newest JupyterLab services. We'll just have a few final remarks and then I can take your questions. Just to conclude, we have covered here the updated JupyterLab FEniCS service and the new JupyterChase service. But we actually have two other JupyterLab flavors on o²S²PARC that might be of interest to you. We've covered both of these in previous webinars. So if you're interested in them, feel free to browse our previous webinars. The one entitled JupyterLab for Fair Computational Modeling on o²S²PARC is going to be the one that really goes deep into, for example, the Jupyter Neuron service and how to use that. And yeah, so if you are not yet an o²S²PARC user, please email us in order to request an account. our documentation is, as always, hosted on docs.o²S²PARC.io. And we are happy if you contribute to our open source repository on GitHub. You can submit feature requests or bugs, and it's all found on our ETIS Foundation o²S²PARC SimCore repository. With that, I'll take any questions. And I got one in the chat. If you can get a copy of these slides, I can certainly provide that for you. But also this entire video is going to be posted on YouTube after, I think it usually takes a couple weeks for the video editing to go through, but it'll also be on YouTube for you. Any other questions?
Katie, I have a question. This is Gene.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. You're still around, huh?
Well, I'm coming to you from the other side, actually. So I'm not at NIH anymore.
Gotcha.
So I'm now thinking about o²S²PARC from the point of view of someone, setting up an in silico research program, and so it's great to be thinking about it from another side. And I have what might be a really basic question, which is when you talk about the input and the outputs that allow you to connect to other services, what are the sort of rules for what those other services have to be? Do they have to be within this platform, or can they connect to other services, anywhere on the open web?
Right. So this, the inputs and outputs are really for communicating within the o²S²PARC platform. And we, of course, want to have as much as possible all the tools that other researchers use. But yes, it has to be through the o²S²PARC platform. That being said, the inputs and outputs could just be files. And in this case, we generally are going to be using files. So files can be downloaded locally. For example, if you create something on your JupyterLab and its output is a file, you can certainly download that locally and then use that for whatever else. Yes? Is
it possible to have a service running somewhere else that is updating automatically a file that's inside a JupyterLab in o²S²PARC, or is that dangerous for various reasons?
We don't have that functionality just yet. So I can think of a couple of applications of using o²S²PARC for communicating outside. One example could be your JupyterLab can clone or even push to Git repositories. And so this way you can get information from outside or even push back to your Git repository. Another thing is that we have the o²S²PARC API, which is not usable for JupyterLabs, but we have several different what we call solvers or computational services. And using the API, you can run this Python code from anywhere and then talk to your selected computational service on o²S²PARC and then get the results back that way.
Yeah. Cool. That's interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Nice to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Still around. Any other questions? All right, well, with that, thank you for your time. Thanks for attending our webinar today. I hope you take a look at some of the resources that we have on o²S²PARC. And yeah, if you have any further questions, feel free to email us and connect with us. Have a great rest of your day, afternoon, evening, wherever you might be in the world. And see you soon.